ago we lived in peace with native cedar trees that grew on cliffs and draws where fires could not reach. Then European settlers stopped the fires prairies need, which started an invasion of a million cedar trees.
Hey, great. I will have a warning to this presentation that if you're here to listen about trees and how great they are and how to plant them and how to grow them, you are in the wrong place. You are triggered by talking negative about trees. You are in the wrong spot. If you don't like trees, if you are okay with me saying trees are bad, then you are in the right spot. So again, work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Been within RCS for several years, and just a very enjoyable position because I get to work with farmers and ranchers, and specifically in Greenwood County, I get to work with those ranchers, and that's been an enjoyable experience for me because not only do I get to learn from them, but then maybe I can provide a little bit of information to them as well, and maybe help their ranches. And that's, to me, the most enjoyable experience is to working with those ranchers and learn more from them than they learn from me. And I see some faces out in the crowd that I've certainly learned a lot from, and I appreciate you all for doing that. So I want to talk about woody encroachment and the impact on grasslands today. First, we want to identify what is a grassland. And, so we can go to the books and we can see what is a grassland. And generally, large-scale treeless ecosystems dominated by herbaceous vegetation. So grass and wildflowers and forbs and legumes, that diversity that creates the grassland, not just grass, but a lot of the other things that come with it. If you were around last weekend in this country, in this area, you knew that there was quite an interesting experience that came through, and that was the Unbound Gravel Race. Folks came from all across the world to race in this Unbound Gravel Race, and I was following them on Facebook, social media, and it was just really interesting, the pictures that were coming through social media from these folks that were from all across the world. And, I really studied each picture. And when I was looking at these pictures, I was trying to key in on one specific thing, and that was, are there trees in that picture? And, I don't know if you can see it, if it's very clear here, but every one of these pictures, I can find a tree. Of all the pictures that I saw, only one picture had a viewscape without a tree. And that was just a small snapshot of that picture, of the landscape. I'm sure if we panned in each direction, you'd probably find a tree in that picture. But of all those pictures, only one had did not have a tree in it. However, their experience was amazing, as they explained on social media, because of the open vistas. Many of these folks came from areas that does not have trees in it, does not have the landscape that we have here in the Flint Hills and across the Great Plains of the United States. And so we want to preserve that for them so that when they do come, it doesn't become like what they experience back home. Maybe a forest, maybe an area that they don't have the viewscape because of skyscrapers, because of urban areas. So I feel special living in this area because we have these viewscapes. And my goal in my career is to try to preserve this as much as possible. So grasslands in North America, our ecosystem, is obviously made up of grasslands. And historically, we had disturbances in that grassland to keep it treeless. These disturbances included herbivory, so grazing by ungulates, herbivores, fire. Fire would rage before settlement from many areas in southwest Kansas, and that same fire could rage all the way up into Ohio. That same fire. So it's hard to understand the type of fire that created a treeless landscape like the Great Plains. And then obviously the climate also affects how well trees can grow in this area. But we've certainly lost a lot of grasslands in our Great Plains. And so 62% loss of grasslands due to conversion, and that conversion could be urban development, could be cropland development, could be conversion to forest. Right here in the tallgrass prairie, which would extend from the Flint Hills all the way up into Ohio and Missouri and Iowa, that tallgrass prairie is the most endangered ecosystem in the world, where we have over a 90% loss of the tallgrass prairie. Fortunately, here in the Flint Hills, as many of you know, we have not seen that big of a loss. And the main reason for us is because of the rock that we have. Those ranchers that might cuss the rock whenever they're trying to build a fence, they are fortunate that that currently are not driving a combine and that they're ranching because of that rock. So that is one benefit to the Flint Hills, is we have that rock to preserve our Flint Hills. And so throughout the history of humans coming into and settling this part of the Great Plains, there have been many programs by the government to plant trees. And those tree planting programs were thought to be able to change that landscape for the better. You know, the government thought that if we had settlers coming here, that we could defy drought by planting trees. We could make places that were inhospitable hospitable for humans. And so we had big programs to plant trees across the landscape. And we also did a great job at utilizing these trees for our livestock as well. Before we had barbed wire, we planted hedgerows, as you can see on the left. And those hedgerows were kept nice and trimmed so that they were bull tight and horse tall. And that way that they would be a living fence and would pretty much create these corrals for our livestock. Those hedgerows, as you know, have grown tall, and the primary tree that was planted in those hedgerows is Osage orange or bodark or hedge, and now they're expanding across our landscape now. Everybody knows the eastern red cedar on the right. It's planted for wildlife habitat or viewscapes, visual screens, those type of things, especially around urban areas. But here recently, and I know Jackson will talk a little bit about it, about the RAP, Rangeland Analysis Platform. This has really changed our view of Great Plains grasslands and what impacts are having on our Great Plains grassland, specifically for tree and woody invasion. So we've taken satellite data and have been able to show over time through this rangeland analysis platform how much actually we've lost to woody invasion. And we can pull out a lot of different things from this RAP data, and it's been really useful for a lot of different things, but specifically for us understanding that woody transition and how that's been impacted across our Great Plains. So you can see pictures of Kansas in the 1990s. That red is where the threats are for woody invasion, where we've got those draws, those woody draws full of invasive species, of woody invasive species that are going to threaten the surrounding grasslands. And as we transition into the 2020s, how that red is expanded and those trees keep growing, they keep expanding. So it's really important to be able to view this, because I've talked to a lot of ranchers and we talk about, you know, where their trees are located and you know, how bad it is in their ranch. And they said, oh, that draw's always looked like that. You know, it's always had the trees in it. But we can pull up this RAP data and we can show that that draw didn't actually look like that 30 years ago. It was open. And so when you are on your ranch day after day, it's tough for you to see those transitions and see those changes. But with this, we can really see those changes, not only from a ranch scale, but also a Great Plains scale. Why should we be concerned? What is it about woody invasion? I mean, I've got trees in my yard. Dr. Browning mentions I've got trees out in my pasture. He reminds me of that all the time, and I appreciate you for doing that. But why are we concerned about woody invasion? Why are we concerned about trees? If you think about where we're located in the Great Plains, in the Flint Hills, and why we should be concerned, there are a lot of impacts that we need to be concerned with. One of those is loss in production. Grazing, cattle, make up a tremendous economic power in Chase County and there's the surrounding Flint Hills. And so when we look at how much grassland we've lost from woody invasion, the numbers are staggering. So if you look on that right side and look at loss in 2022, so we just look at 2022 and we take that rangeland analysis platform data and we see how much grassland have we transitioned from grassland to woodies. And the fact that underneath that woody invasion, those trees, we have very little to almost no grass production. We've lost If you put that into round bales, we've lost 1.6 million round bales just in 2022. If you had a cow herd across Kansas, we'd have another 157,000 cows that we could graze in Kansas if we didn't have woody invasion. Or stockers, 690,000. So those are numbers that are important. Those are numbers that are economically important, and we need to be aware of them. If you look at just two snapshots, 1990 and 2021, so site A is across the top. On the left, the black and white picture, top left, that was an acre. Top right, same acre. Site B in the bottom left, that's an acre. Lower right, same acre. And you can see that loss in production when we have woody species invade on that 1 acre. That 1 acre down in the lower right puts about 500 pounds of production on a year. The one in the upper right, about 3,000 pounds of grass production. Those are big numbers that can have a big impact on a cattle operation. Fire. We know fire is important in the Flint Hills and in the grasslands across the Great Plains. However, when we have woody invasion, especially cedar trees, that fire becomes almost where you can't fight it anymore. You just have to let it burn. Those experiences, if you talk to firefighters in South Central Kansas, in the Gyp Hills region, those firefighters experience that, seems like every 5 years or so. And as those fires rage, when especially cedar trees get up into the canopy of those cedar trees, you just can't stop that fire anymore. And so wildfire intensity is extreme whenever we have specifically eastern red cedar invasion. Ticks, we all know, and we've heard in the news about ticks and the diseases that are spread by ticks. And if you look at a closed canopy cedar forest, we have about 437 ticks within that area. Look at that same grassland, and we only have 16. So a significant difference. A fire has an impact on those ticks as well as reducing those numbers. And so when we're talking about diseases for humans and for cattle, those open grasslands are an important way to reduce the vector of those diseases. Biodiversity is important as well. So biodiversity are those number of species. When we talk about in our grasslands, our 70 some species of grass and our 500 species of wildflowers, that diversity declines whenever we have woody invasion, to where it's just a closed canopy cedar forest, and that's the only plant that's out there is cedar as we get into that closed canopy. So that diversity has a big impact on a lot of different things. Water infiltration into that soil. And so that water that falls from our sky and as precipitation, one, if it touches cedar trees, it gets up into that canopy and doesn't make it to the ground. And then two, those cedar trees can drink 30 gallons of water a day. And so that's a big impact on reducing those stream flows as they flow down into our ponds, even our streams and rivers. So it's important to have that grassland, which does not take as much water out of that soil, and also slows that water down and allows it to get into that soil. Wildlife habitat as well. So prairie chicken habitat, we all know prairie chickens don't like trees. Trees are impeding the ability for them to survive. They have this natural avoidance of trees in our grasslands. And so if we have a tree, they show that they're going to start avoiding that as close as a third of a mile. And at 1.2 miles, which is about 2,000 meters, they're gonna want to start avoiding that area, and completely avoidance as we get closer to that tree. And so, when we talk about trees on that landscape, it's important, especially in the prairie chicken habitat and where they lek, is to try to control those trees up in that area. Talk about carbon sequestration. So carbon sequestration, we understand trees can sequester carbon. They're not bad in that situation, but where they store that carbon is important. Trees store their carbon up in the top growth grasses store most of their carbon in the bottom growth. So when we have a forest fire, when we have a fire taking out the trees, then we lose that sequestered carbon to the atmosphere. However, if we just burn the top growth off of that grass, then that carbon can stay in that soil. So it's important when we talk about sequestering that carbon, taking that out of the atmosphere and putting it into our soil. Grasses are much better for sequestering that carbon. And so we talk about, woody encroachment and the whys. And so, we understand that many things belong in a healthy grassland, but certainly trees are not one of them. And the goal is to try to prevent that loss of our ecosystem, because if you think about it, if we change from grassland and change that to forest land, we are changing an ecosystem. We have to think of grassland as that ecosystem. So, summary, grasslands are being lost at an alarming rate. We know that. If we don't start addressing these threats, then we will lose that ecosystem. So that's all I have for this talk. So we'll switch it over.
You let them grow, the danger will increase. Before it's too late, stop those cedar trees while you still can. Before it's too late, stop those cedar trees.